大家好啊！
大家好，
咪又到咗我哋讀你聽嘅時間啦。咁咧上一回咧，我咧就開始咗呢個 A.Christie 嘅一本小作品啦，其中之一本啦，叫做450 from Paddington 嚇。咁啊一個同火車有關係嘅一個兇殺案嚇。咁我太太上一集就上一個 chapter 咧就唔喺度啊，我而家咧就 recap 下啦。咁第一個 chapter 咧就係講呢個故事嘅女主人翁啦，佢個名咧叫做 Mrs McGillicuddy， 個名比較翹口，係叫 McGillicuddy。咁咧佢咧就去搭火車翻屋企，喺 London 買完嘢就翻屋企啦。咁屋企就應該係啲鄉郊啲嘅地方啦。咁搭火車翻去咯，係咪？咁啊翻到去咁啊冇嘢㗎，咁啊一路行行行。但係咧去到架車去到咁上下，即係已經離開咗市中心。咁上下咧，佢就目擊到咧隔離嘅車軌有個火車經過嘅時候咧，就見到個火車入面發生嘅事，火車車廂入面發生嘅事，就係一個男人碾死咗一個女人。
咁快都見到嘅？
因為架火車即係有慢駛，或者停，或者有停頓過一段時間，一段短時間，係啦，或者有或者係慢駛，或者係停咁樣。佢就睇到啦。然之後就架車又繼續行駛啦，係咁樣嘅一個短瞬間。係啦。咁然之後佢當然就決定就係報案啦。咁但係嗰啲搣飛嗰啲嘅你係咪啊？你係咪傻㗎咁啦？咁但係都話得啦，我會幫你處理啦，咁我會同你報告啦。咁但係佢覺得佢係咪真係有報㗎？咁然之後咧，佢亦都有再聯絡一啲人，我唔記得咗係報館定警察局。總之佢交代咗一啲人去幫佢去報案，即係佢冇親自去，佢交代咗啲人去報，俾媒體又好，應該係俾媒體咁，或者俾警察局。於是乎佢就唔理啦，佢就翻屋企啦。咁佢翻到屋企咧，就有個女人迎接佢啦，唔知咩關係住啦。總之就係佢叫另外一個人叫阿 Jane 咁樣，叫佢同阿 Jane 講：我見到兇殺案啊！咁啊完，好短嘅，好短嘅。咁咧就接住講落去啦。咁究竟咁繼續發展會係點咧？佢作為一個證人，佢會唔會有進一步行動咧？就係咁樣，就係咁樣。
OK。
好簡單。好啦，咁咪繼續係 Chapter 2。True to the precepts handed down to her by her mother and grandmother, to wit, that a true lady can neither be shocked nor surprised. Miss Marple merely raised her eyebrows and shook her head as she said, "Most distressing for you, Elspeth." Elspeth 就係嗰個 McGillicuddy 個名。Most distressing for you, Elspeth, and surely most unusual. I think you had better tell me about it at once. 咁咧呢度就有個轉折啦，就係呢個 Miss Marple 無端出現咗。咁我原來佢就係應該係 Miss Marple 個 friend 嚟嘅。呢個 McGillicuddy。咁 Miss Marple 呢個 Miss Marple 又係咩人咧？佢就係 A.Christie 嘅作品系列作品入面其中之一個唔係偵探嘅偵探。即係一個 Miss Marple 咧係一個咩人咧？佢唔係差人，佢唔係 detective， 佢純粹係一個好叻推理嘅一個老太太。咁佢犀利到咩程度咧？就係連 Scotland Yard 啊，即係連警察局咧都覺得佢係公認佢係勁㗎啦。有陣時候都會請佢嚟幫手。Sherlock Holmes 係全職嘅偵探啊嘛，但係呢個 Miss Marple 佢就應該唔係，佢唔係嘅嚇，佢唔係做偵探為生嘅人嚟嘅，咁咯。咁 Miss Marple 就係 A.Christie 嘅著作入面其中之一個，即係呢啲推理者係啦咁。咁即係話原來嗰個主人翁係 Miss Marple 個 friend，咁啊解釋咗好多，咁啊即刻就 好有聯繫啦，所有嘢都唔使去揾人啦，係咪？原來係 friend 嚟嘅，真係。That was exactly what Mrs. McGillicuddy wanted to do， 即係要同人哋講發生咩事。Allowing her hostess to draw her nearer to the fire, she sat down, pulled off her gloves, and plunged into a vivid narrative。即係呢個屋企咧，原來佢唔係翻自己屋企，佢去咗人哋屋企。呢個 Mrs. McGillicuddy 去咗邊個屋企咧？就係去咗 Miss Marple 屋企。Miss Marple listened with close attention. When Mrs. McGillicuddy at last paused for breath, Miss Marple spoke with decision. The best thing, I think, my dear, is for you to go upstairs and take off your hat and have a wash. Then we will have supper, during which we will not discuss this at all. After supper, we can go into the matter thoroughly and discuss it from every aspect. Mrs. McGillicuddy concurred with this suggestion. The two ladies had supper, discussing as they ate various aspects of life as lived in the village of St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple commented on general distrust of the new organist, related the recent scandal about the chemist's wife, and touched on hostility between the schoolmistress and the village institute. They then discussed Miss Marple's and Mrs. McGillicuddy's gardens. Peonies, said Miss Marple as she rose from table, the most unaccountable. Either they do or they don't do. But if they do establish themselves, they are with you for life, so to speak, and really most beautiful varieties nowadays. They settled themselves by the fire again, and Miss Marple brought out two old Waterford glasses from a corner cupboard, and from another cupboard produced a bottle. No coffee tonight for you, Elspeth, she said. You are already overexcited, and probably would not sleep. I prescribe a glass of my cowslip wine, and later, perhaps, a cup of chamomile tea. Mrs. McGillicuddy acquiescing in these arrangements, Miss Marple poured out the wine. Jane, said Mrs. McGillicuddy, as she took an appreciative sip, you don't think, do you, that I dreamt it or imagined it? Certainly not, said Miss Marple with warmth. Mrs. McGillicuddy heaved a sigh of relief. That ticket collector, she said, he thought so. Quite polite, but all the same. I think, Elspeth, that was quite natural under the circumstances. It sounded, and indeed was, a most unlikely story, and you were a complete stranger to him. No, I have no doubt at all that you saw what you've told me you saw. It's very extraordinary, but not at all impossible. I recollect myself being interested when a train ran parallel to one on which I was travelling, to notice what a vivid and intimate picture one got of what was going on in one or two of the carriages. A little girl, I remember once, playing with a teddy bear, and suddenly she threw it deliberately at a fat man who was asleep in a corner, and he bounced up and looked most indignant, and the other passengers looked so amused. I saw them all quite vividly. I could have described afterwards exactly what they looked like and what they had on. Mrs. McGillicuddy nodded gratefully. That's just how it was. The man had his back to you, you say, so you didn't see his face? No. And a woman, you can describe her, young, old, youngish, between 30 and 35, I should think. I couldn't say closer than that. Good looking? That again, I couldn't say. Her face, you see, was all contorted, and Miss Marple said quickly, Yes, I quite understand. How was she dressed? She had on a fur coat of some kind, a palish fur, no hat, her hair was blonde, and there was nothing distinctive that you can remember about the man. Mrs. McGillicuddy took a little time to think carefully before she replied. He was tallish and dark, I think. He had a heavy coat on so that I couldn't judge his build very well. She added despondently, It's not really very much to go on. It's something, said Miss Marple. She paused before saying, You feel quite sure in your own mind that the girl was dead. She was dead, I'm sure of it. Her tongue came out, and I'd rather not talk about it. Of course not, said Miss Marple quickly. We shall know more, I expect, in the morning. In the morning? I should imagine it will be in the morning papers. After this man had attacked and killed her, he would have a body on his hands. What would he do? Presumably he would leave the train quickly at the first station. By the way, can you remember if it was a corridor carriage? No, it was not. That seems to point to a train that was not going far afield. It would almost certainly stop at Brackhampton. Let us say he leaves the train at Brackhampton, perhaps arranging the body in a corner seat, with her face hidden by the fur collar to delay discovery. Yes, I think that is what he would do. But of course, it will be discovered before very long. And I should imagine that the news of a murdered woman discovered on a train would be almost certainly to be in the morning papers. We shall see. But it was not in the morning papers. Miss Marple and Mrs. McGillicuddy, after making sure of this, finished their breakfast in silence. Both were reflecting. After breakfast, they took a turn around the garden. But this, usually an absorbing pastime, was today somewhat half-hearted. Miss Marple did indeed call attention to some new and rare species she had acquired for her rock garden, but did so in an almost absent-minded manner. And Mrs. McGillicuddy did not, as was customary, counter-attack with a list of her own recent acquisitions. The garden is not looking at all as it should, said Miss Marple, but still speaking absent-mindedly. Dr. Haydock has absolutely forbidden me to do any stooping or kneeling, and really, what can you do if you don't stoop or kneel? There's old Edwards, of course, but so opinionated, and all this jobbing gets them into bad habits. Lots of cups of tea and so much pottering. Not any real work. Oh, I know, said Mrs. McGillicuddy. Of course, there's no question of my being forbidden to stoop. But really, especially after meals and having put on weight, she looked down at her ample proportions. It does bring on heartburn. There was a silence, and then Mrs. McGillicuddy planted her feet sturdily, stood still, and turned on her friend. Well, she said. It was a small, insignificant word, but it required a full significance from Mrs. McGillicuddy's tone, and Miss Marple understood its meaning perfectly. I know, she said. The two ladies looked at each other. I think, said Miss Marple, we might walk down to the police station and talk to Sergeant Cornish. He's intelligent and patient, and I know him very well, and he knows me. I think he'll listen and pass the information on to the proper quarter. Accordingly, some 3/4 of an hour later, Miss Marple and Mrs. McGillicuddy were talking to a fresh-faced, grave man between 30 and 40 who listened attentively to what they had to say. Frank Cornish received Miss Marple with cordiality and even deference. He set chairs for the two ladies and said, Now what can we do for you, Miss Marple? Miss Marple said, I would like you, please, to listen to my friend Mrs. McGillicuddy's story. And Sergeant Cornish had listened. At the close of the recital, he remained silent for a moment or two. Then he said, That's a very extraordinary story. His eyes, without seeming to do so, had sized Mrs. McGillicuddy up while she was telling it. On the whole, he was favourably impressed. A sensible woman, able to tell a story clearly, not so far as he could judge. An over-imaginative or hysterical woman. Moreover, Miss Marple, so it seemed, believed in the accuracy of her friend's story, and he knew all about Miss Marple. Everybody in St. Mary Mead knew Miss Marple, fluffy and dithery in appearance, but inwardly as sharp and as shrewd as they make them. He cleared his throat and spoke. Of course, he said, you may have been mistaken. I'm not saying you were, mind, but you may have been. There's a lot of horseplay goes on. It may have been serious or fatal. I know what I saw, said Mrs. McGillicuddy grimly. And you won't budge from it, thought Frank Cornish. And I'd say that, likely or unlikely, you may be right. Aloud, he said, "You reported it to the railway officials, and you've come and reported it to me. That's the proper procedure, and you may rely on me to have inquiries instituted." He stopped. Miss Marple nodded her head gently, satisfied. Mrs. McGillicuddy was not quite so satisfied, but she did not say anything. Sergeant Cornish addressed Miss Marple, not so much because he wanted her ideas, as because he wanted to hear what she would say. "Granted the facts are as reported," he said, "what do you think has happened to the body?" "There seems to be only two possibilities," said Miss Marple without hesitation. "The most likely one, of course, is that the body was left in the train, but that seems improbable now, for it would have been found sometime last night, by another traveller, or by the railway staff at the train's ultimate destination." Frank Cornish nodded. "The only other course open to the murderer would be to push the body out of the train onto the line. It must, I suppose, be still on the track somewhere as yet undiscovered, though that does seem a little unlikely. But there would be, as far as I can see, no other way of dealing with it." "You read about bodies being put in trunks," said Mrs. McGillicuddy, "but no one travels with trunks nowadays, only suitcases, and you couldn't get a body into a suitcase." "Yes," said Cornish, "I agree with you both. The body, if there is a body, ought to have been discovered by now, or will be very soon. I'll let you know any developments there are, though I dare say you read about them in the papers. There's the possibility, of course, that the woman, though savagely attacked, was not actually dead. She may have been able to leave the train on her own feet." "Hardly without assistance," said Miss Marple, "and if so, it would have been noticed. A man supporting a woman who he says is ill. Yes, it would have been noticed," said Cornish. "Or if a woman was found unconscious or ill in the carriage and was removed to hospital, that too will be on record. I think you may rest assured that you'll hear about it all in a very short time." But that day passed, and the next day. On that evening, Miss Marple received a note from Sergeant Cornish. "In regard to the matter on which you consulted me, full inquiries have been made, with no result. No woman's body has been found. No hospital has administered treatment to a woman such as you describe, and no case of a woman suffering from shock or taken ill or leaving a station supported by a man has been observed. You may take it that the fullest inquiries have been made. I suggest that your friend may have witnessed a scene such as she described, but that it was much less serious than she supposed." 講完啦，咁啊種種跡象就顯示呢個兇案冇發生過喎。
即係個兇手好高超啦。
會唔會個兇案真係冇發生到啊？
唔會啦。
我哋好信呢個 Mrs. McGillicuddy 㗎係嘛？咁好啦，咁即係話 Mrs. McGillicuddy 佢以為佢睇到一啲嘢，但係實際上咧唔係佢睇到嘅，係邊一方面睇錯咗咧？佢話佢睇到嘅就係喺車廂外嘅另一架火車嘅車廂入面發生嘅，一個男人背住佢碾死咗個女人。個女人好似幾後生，個男人完全睇唔到。個女人着住件 fur coat，即係呢啲咁樣嘅嘢，佢睇到嘅，呢係佢嘅口供。咁但係實際上會唔會佢以為佢睇到呢啲嘢，而實際上佢唔係睇到呢啲嘢，佢搞錯咗一啲資訊，而令到件事情有個咁樣嘅發展咧？因為咁樣係唔 make sense 噶嘛。而家如果佢真係有個人死咗，佢係就擁佢出車軌，一係就收埋佢喺個車度，然之後俾人發現。做咩地方可以收埋一個人，一個成年人？
可能佢睇到係個反應，
反射。即係話原來
係佢架的，
即係其實係佢自己架火車。咁但係就算係佢自己架火車，都有個屍體噶嘛。
search 咯。
但係佢頭先嗰個呢個
佢就 search 對面嗰架啫。
唔係 search
咩都 search。
咁你唔會有架火車有屍體喺度唔知㗎嘛？係咪先？所有醫院都問過晒。佢話當然啦，如果佢之後話哦，原來我哋問漏咗呢個，然之後咁 A.Christie 就寫得好渣㗎啦，係咪先？咁呢個 A.Christie 咧，佢係歷史上嗰個銷量最暢銷嘅作家嚟。女作家就一定係第一㗎啦，所有作家都幾乎係第一嘅，除咗 Shakespeare 之外，就係佢㗎。佢係咁勁㗎。你估下佢賣咗幾多本書？
唔知。8個 million。
爭好遠。
10個 billion。
20個。
好多。
好誇張。誇張。咁即係佢買咗咁多本書，咁有佢原因嘅，寫得好咯。寫人物寫得好。
可能係個女主角有幻覺。
咁又唔會，即係佢可能睇錯咗啲嘢，而導致到佢好似出現幻覺。因為佢目擊呢件案件發生嘅時候，佢冇食藥，佢係瞓醒咗，但係佢瞓醒咗之後係清醒嘅，佢唔係迷迷糊糊嘅，佢唔係食藥嘅。
電視嚟嘅其實。
Victorian Age 嗰陣時都啱，唔知有冇電視咧？可能有電視嘅。
但係冇佢黑白色又唔似係。
但係嗰個年代火車上面唔會有電視嘅。同埋佢哋都特登有提一樣嘢，我覺得幾有趣，就係佢哋都話佢哋係嗰個年代都唔用 trunks 㗎啦。即係佢哋係用 suitcase 㗎啦，已經。trunks 係啲英國佬好中意用嘅，即係一大個大木箱。我都有用過，好大個木箱。嗰個箱咧真係有機會可以裝到一個女人，有機會。但係佢都特登講埋，就係已經唔興用 trunks 㗎啦。旅客係用 suitcase 㗎啦，一個 suitcase 就真係裝唔到啦，裝唔到一個女小姐。咁所以就係而家就係特登設計咗一個謎團俾你嚇，你諗啦，咁樣睇下點樣發展啦。好啦，我哋下次再講啦，拜拜。